again, and welcome back to another Virginia Clean Cities Technology Happy Hour. Today, we are going to be talking with Tucker Perkins, who wrote a recent book called Path to Zero 12 Conversations That Changed the World. Tucker Perkins is the president and CEO of the Propane Education and Research Council, also known as PERC, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit which invests in the research and development of propane powered innovation, consumer education about propane, and promotes the safe, efficient use of propane through safety training and education programs. Mr. Perkins graduated from Virginia Tech with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and earned his MBA from the University of Richmond. He is active with many industry organizations, including the National Propane Gas Association, the Industry Truck Association, the Outdoor Power Institute, and the World LP Gas Association. Mr. Perkins is a dynamic and relatable leader who has amplified propane's voice in the national energy conversation. Tucker has been a frequent keynote speaker on energy-related topics on the domestic and international stage. Perkins is also a host of a podcast called Path to Zero, in which he engages energy thought leaders in proactive discussion regarding energy and environment and the path to zero carbon emissions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Perkins.
I noticed it's billed as not only a book talk, but a happy hour. So I'm going to try to make this happy and try to have fun. And I don't intend to talk more than 30 minutes or so, but, Gregory asked me to talk about the book, but I've been thinking a lot because the book was really written for what I would call a consumer facing audience. I'll talk about why that is. I've thought about how to tailor it very specifically to clean cities and maybe even more specifically to Virginia clean cities. But I wanted to at least talk about some of the key themes that we developed, maybe how we got there. And I would love to have a conversation because I don't know that the way we think of it is the only way, but it's certainly, I think, one of the right ways. So I look forward to kind of a conversation at the end. Whenever I start talking about propane, I usually try to get people just to even think beyond the grill. And for those of you who kind of know about propane and auto gas and what we can do in transportation, replacing diesel fuel, it's still usually the hardest step is that first step to get people. I don't care whether they're legislators or consumers or consumer activists to try to make the leap from the fuel that powers 50 million grills in the U.S. to how a low carbon fuel, a renewable based fuel in the future can be a part of the environmental solutions. And I find for consumer audiences, I really like talking about clean cooking because I think there is a story that really empowers women, promotes the concept around health. For those of you who don't know, it's one of the United Nations key sustainable development goals, clean cooking. In fact, we'll announce next week a multi-billion-dollar investment in clean cooking aimed mainly at Africa, but moving people from cooking with wood or charcoal or dung and using propane. By the way, 3.8 million people a year die of indoor air pollution from inadequate cooking. And then I love the story of empowering women, kind of what it means from spending your whole day either tending a fire or looking for wood or keeping, your cooking going to now doing that in 30 minutes or 40 minutes out of the day, what that gives the ladies of that community time to do. So it's a great story as I talk with other people. I don't know that it's super relevant in Virginia because it does, but it plays well with consumer audiences. And it really is the essence of how you can change fuels, whether it's wood, charcoal, or dung, or diesel fuel, coal, and oil to a cleaner fuel like propane and really make a difference. I'll get to the book, but I think, what I really started seeing is this uniform chorus that the only path to a clean climate is through electrification. And I know the view was that electrification would only come from solar and wind, but even 10 years ago, the numbers didn't really make sense. It didn't really balance. And while a lot of people think about electrification in different ways, this is the kind of electrification, that sometimes we see. And as you move outside of Virginia, but you don't have to go very far outside of Virginia. You can be in West Virginia, you can be in Kentucky, you can still see a tremendous amount of coal powered electricity. Um, I think the other thing though that I like to mention, because I never know who is aligned in what camps. I would say Tucker Perkins, PERC, and I would say the propane industry are all together in that we agree climate change is real, that we agree we need to do everything in our power to reduce carbon emissions. And we see evidence of that every day. So, I don't find sometimes my brethren in the oil industry or even the natural gas industry are quite as public as we are about trying to drive lower uh, carbon solutions that are both good for the climate or health. But I do like to just take a pause and say anyone who wants to question whether we're a climate denier, they needn't look far to realize that no, we're absolutely believers in reducing carbon, and we live it every day. So we'll talk a lot about electrification. I know this is the kind of electrification we think about. I want to talk about this picture right here because I think this picture gives us all hope. And in the book, I talk a lot about the future and hope, but I think this is a perfect example of land use planning, uh, mixed, energy, solar and wind. I think that's a good example of where we're trying to go. And I think one of the key features for us is it's just not the only way. I look at the numbers. The numbers in Virginia aren't much different than they are nationally. But nationally, those of you who don't follow this every day, about 60% of the grid is still producing power by burning natural gas or coal. Coal gets less and less, about 16% coal, um, almost 50% natural gas, and really about 20% or so is made up of renewables, and nuclear power is the last almost 20%, 19%. So the grid has a long ways to go to really be renewable. And I'll talk about data centers in a bit, but I think two things have really confused the power generation industry. And one is data centers, and the other is just industrial and commercial demand. I think the industry grew at rates somewhere between 1% and 2% for about the last decade. And all of a sudden, we're on 5% and 6% growth rates on an annual basis, largely driven right now by data. And it's not unique to Virginia, but it is dominant in Virginia. So we'll talk about that. One of the reasons we love to promote propane as an environmentally friendly fuel is we've done the math. The carbon intensity of propane is 89. We'll kind of leave it at that. And I don't get too hung up on the units. Higher numbers are worse for carbon intensity. Natural gas is about the same. But even look at Virginia today. If you look at the inputs of all the grid today for Virginia, the carbon intensity of the grid in Virginia is 100. So today, we can make a pretty clear case that actually the path to a cleaner climate is by using more propane, more natural gas, and less electricity. It sometimes shocks me if you just look at this chart. And by the way, we update this chart once a year, and it does move around a little bit. Weirdly, I think from 22 to 23, some of the carbon numbers went up as utilities substituted a few dirtier fuels to make power. But I love to look out there. Look at West Virginia and Kentucky, 270, 235. Um, Wyoming always stands out to me as a super coal intensive state. So you can see some of those really high offenders of carbon emissions. And by the way, we'll never be better than Vermont. Almost all hydropower, what they don't make themselves, they import from Canada. It's pretty hard to beat the grid in the Pacific Northwest because of their hydro power. but you can kind of look around. And I'm happy to I'll share this with you. And by the way, anybody who wants even the underlying science, we're happy to share it. Don't talk a lot about reliability. I don't need to talk to you about clean cities. We're all aligned. And I think ultimately, whether we're thinking about home heat or vehicle power, certainly electrification is going to be a part of that. I know in California, as they were thinking about outlawing a lot of low carbon fossil fuels like propane and natural gas in off road and even on road markets, you have to think about continuity of service and reliability of service and resilience. Clearly, we see the grid going down more than normal, sometimes from storms, sometimes just from demand. And that's really how we get to where we are residentially, with most homes today having a residential backup generator. It's one reason we're talking residentially, commercially, industrially about devices that might make heat and power. This is kind of a neat device if you haven't seen it. And we're starting to see it appear all over the country, but certainly in Virginia, we're working with Train on this technology into a couple of their big projects right now. But so it makes hot water, and then also in the process of making hot water, it makes electricity. Uh, if you care about things like that, I wanted to show you a microgrid. This is a real world microgrid in California. We've been involved in microgrids in California for probably almost a decade as they started to de-energize the grid for fire risk. But communities had to have power, uh, even albeit just for the fire station or for emergency uses. But this is solar panel supplemented by generally 50 to 100 kW propane generators that can produce all the power that community needs for short bursts. We're starting to see this now in Virginia. And I think I won't talk about it much, but again, microgrids are really changing the conversation, certainly changing the conversation in Virginia. And if you're following, I mean, I think Dominion does a really good job of being fairly transparent about what they're doing, where they're doing it, how they're doing it, but the growth rates. And I think for us, we're involved in more data center work right now than we have. We're involved in more data centers today than we have been cumulatively over the last 20 years. And it's just because data centers are trying to go wherever they can find adequate power. They also use a heck of a lot of water. If you don't follow this stuff, something I think about environmentally all the time. And then really as much power demand and cooling demand. We're beginning to separate. All right, we're going to start easing into the book. And one of the things that, struck me about the book is I'll talk about it often, but I did this from hundreds of podcasts that we really had with energy experts, climate experts. And one of the things that became clearly obvious to me early on is we couldn't get where we were going with just solar and wind. But as we started looking at it, I didn't realize that I think we're probably at the upper limit that we're ever going to see for hydroelectric power. Clearly, we're not going to build a lot more dams. We're probably pulling down dams now. So the net power output from hydroelectric almost begins to diminish. But I thought pump storage would become a bigger deal. But, you're just not seeing a lot of advances in pump storage. In fact, all of us in Virginia, I would say, benefit from the Bath County project for Dominion, but you don't see many of those on the drawing boards now at all. Solar and wind, we're big fans. I think, as I show in that picture in the second panel, the issue around solar and wind, though, is the time of delivery and that you got to have storage. And the minute you inject energy storage in the conversation, I find the economics change drastically. I would argue also that energy security enters into the picture because as a country, I might even say as a continent, we don't have our act together around minerals processing, mineral control. We're pretty good at battery manufacturing, but those core ingredients, minerals, they're almost all coming from either Chinese interests or interests that are largely controlled by China. And I know we're working our way towards being less dependent, but I will tell you, as somebody who studies this daily, we are far, far, far from having any kind of energy independence when we start talking about batteries and battery materials. That lower right panel is my picture of hydrogen. I love this little box if you don't know about it. That's a propane powered fuel cell, generates 1.25 kilowatts on a continuous basis. We're putting this in a lot of homes right now. We mount it with in this case, a Tesla Powerwall. Uh, and we're seeing really good applications for homes that want to be independent or perhaps even live in a bi-directional grid world. So I do think there's hope for hydrogen. I would tell you, as a guy who studies it again, industrially, it may work. I don't see any hope for 2 decades, maybe, for what we'll call consumer facing hydrogen. Even hydrogen vehicles. And I know Nikola's out there kind of playing around, but that's in a Class 8 application, very specialized. And I think we could talk about hydrogen if you want offline later on, or even during this conversation. But hydrogen has a carbon problem. It's got a safety problem. It's got a cost problem. It's got a water problem. And until electricity is just everywhere where we can use electrolyzers efficiently, I don't think we're going to see a cost-effective green hydrogen. And then the last piece is nuclear power. I would say 5 years ago, anytime we did a mass balance of power demand and power supply, it didn't compute. And when you talk to people, they would say, well, that's because we were figuring in some magic bullet. Sometimes it was technology, sometimes it was efficiency. Many times, though, it was nuclear power. I think as Virginians, I'm fairly ebullient about how Dominion is approaching it, perhaps how Yunkin is approaching it. I think we're taking the lead in small modulars right now. I think we're going to see a lot of activity in this new DOE at probably scaling up North Anna. But I think that is one of the secrets as we think about how the electric grid is going to respond to demand, and that is through nuclear power. And I think that's a really uniquely Virginia thing that I'm always proud of. I just throw this slide in. Actually, it's funny. Next week, I've got meetings with the Japanese on both nuclear fusion and renewable propane. So it'll be a very interesting week. But I do think that's a game changer in the energy space when we figure out fusion. And I'm one that says when. My most respected mentor for nuclear power says she doesn't know when, and she wouldn't even get out 50 years. But I'm there. I'm a believer that one day certainly nuclear fission will look differently than it does today. But I will just throw this out. Then when we finally figure out fusion, and maybe that's 2100, maybe that's 2200, whoever knows. It is a completely different world. And for me, it's a stark reminder that we best not guess much beyond 2045, 2050. That battery technology will shift, nuclear power technology will shift. As a guy who works with internal combustion engine technology every day, that's going to shift. And we'll talk about that. Okay, how did I get to the book? I got to the book from a podcast. And we have done now about 130 podcasts. Some really fascinating guests, climate scientists, carbon experts, nuclear experts, mechanical engineers, environmental lawyers, equity people, social science, every flavor you can imagine, and generally 3 or 4. This particular fellow in this picture is a professor in New York, aggressive on climate issues, rode his bike, would only ride his bike, doesn't eat meat. The kind of guy I love talking to these kind of people because they just have such a passion for the topic. As we did more and more podcasts, we realized we were coming up with a narrative that really wasn't being told. And then lastly, I just speak to this. I didn't really like the way the narrative was being told. Almost every author was a doomsday, and I just don't find that doomsday. I love the heat will kill you first. By the way, I don't even remotely agree with that title. I think the pollution will kill you first. The heat will kill you second. But I just didn't like these the tone of most of these. That they weren't friendly tones, and I find the lack of human action here has been the most frustrating part of this. Activists want to act, governments may or may not want to act, but there's always been left to humans to just follow. And I don't think that's how it goes. I think this will be driven by consumers wanting to do well. So that's really how we got to the book. And then we've been telling the story about how to clean hard to clean areas. This particular picture is the Port of New York, now standardizing on this particular truck running on propane instead of diesel fuel. Completely agreed to by the labor unions, the mechanics that work on this stuff, for all the right reasons. We had seen how valuable it is to replace diesel fuel with propane, how you can save money, cut emissions, cut carbon, quiet the place. And we've seen the same with school buses. And so we really started talking about a story that's different. I just want to mention kind of to you unique clean cities people, as we're really thinking about how do we get to a cleaner climate, how do we clean up transportation, how do we remove the 80 billion gallons of diesel fuel and gasoline that we use every year in the US, which is an obscene amount. Ultimately, our science leads us to believe that hybrid solutions are the best. And I don't really care whether you're talking about light duty cars or Class 8 solutions. We ultimately believe hybrids are going to be the best combination of range, cost, operating cost, environmental benefit. Love to share some of that work with y'all if you're so interested. It's less relevant in a light duty car. It's super relevant in a Class 8 truck. But two of my favorite guests that we had were both mechanical engineers, one in the US and one in Europe. But really had, proved this thesis for quite a few years. And if you ever listen to the chairman of Toyota, Mr. Toyota himself, he always talks about 1690, right? The battery materials that go into one fully electric car can go into 6 plug-in hybrids or 90 Priuses. And he was a guy that even 7, 8 years ago realized how short battery material was going to be. And frankly, it's just not a good scenario right now for how we mine lithium, cobalt, nickel, and a lot of the other super metals. If you don't think the prize is worth the effort, I mean, there it is right there. Let's round up for a moment. 90 million tons of CO2 could be eliminated if we get rid of diesel over propane. The equivalent of taking 21 million cars off the road every year. And we had seen these numbers kind of working with the farm. And I love just kind of deviating for a moment as we talk about working on the farm to show you something that I find so interesting as we think about the farm, and that's clean food. We've been working with a couple of strawberry manufacturers for the better part of 5 years. And the more you learn about the chemical inputs on the farm, this is actually a soil steamer. So eliminating pesticides, herbicides, and using heat. And this particular picture, I think, is actually in strawberries, but we've just finished it in lettuce and a few other crops, very much tailored to each crop. But this is an autonomous, thermally led wagon that is eliminating pesticides and chemicals in the farm. and producing really clean, healthy food. Neat story, and a good segue to the book. So there's the book, and I think Gregory left out to me what's a really important part of that. The title of the book is really Path to Zero. The subtitle is 12 Climate Conversations That Changed the World. Well, what we're doing in this book is going back, kind of collected maybe 12 or so of our favorite themes, not necessarily just 12 specific conversations. We collected them to tell the story from 2050, looking back, how we did get to zero carbon. And let me just lead in with how we got there. I think one, we got there by acknowledging it's not a single path. In our country boy technology, we would say it's not a silver bullet, it's silver buckshot, right? It's a whole. I don't firmly believe it's all of the above at all. I think certain of technologies need to go away. Coal, oil, and wood, I firmly believe need to go away. It's really much more about low carbon fuels like natural gas and propane, doing very different jobs, by the way, not doing the same job, but that wide path mentality, not just electricity that comes from sun and wind. And I think maybe right now we think that's probably a little bit more socialized viewpoint. I would remind you that 2 or 3 years ago, the conversation really was about fossil fuels have to go, nuclear power needs to go. This is about making electricity from solar and wind the only way we'll ever get to a clean climate. I think they'll beyond a wide path. The most important part of that is let engineers and innovators and scientists do their job. Let them be creative. Give them license to run. And we can think about things like small modular reactors. And by the way, ones that don't use water, maybe the ones that use molten salt or molten sulfur or some other technology we haven't thought about. Let's think about batteries, not that just come from lithium, but batteries that come from all kinds of other materials. Let the innovators innovate. And I can share with y'all until Friday night, if you want, stories of innovation that are reducing carbon emissions right now across every industry in America. The third and really important ingredient, and maybe the one that ties it together, is to collaborate. And it's really collaboration that ends in action. So one of the things I love doing on Path to Zero, I don't know that we started, it wasn't done to just promote my view or to promote a view. It was done to create a forum for people who were interested in energy, interested in getting to cleaner energy, letting climate scientists who you would label today as climate deniers, giving them at least a forum to state their piece. And by the way, I'm still confused because I think some people with whom I have great respect and they have great command of the facts, they'll still argue that carbon isn't the problem. I don't fall in that camp, but we've given them a chance to speak and trying to use that as a way to come together to move forward, and by moving forward, taking action to positively impact the environment. And I think it's that simple in the book. We can get there. We can get there if we choose the wide path, if we choose to let scientists innovate, and most importantly, if we sit and talk with their friends, talk with their family, talk with their enemies, reach a consensus about action, and then move forward. I take a slight deviation to use kind of my own innovation story, which is talking about renewable propane. Some of you maybe were in one of the most impactful introductions of renewable propane that I've been associated with. And that was when we introduced renewable propane to the city of Petersburg, probably done 4 or 5 years ago now. It was a really strong day. Joe Morrissey spoke, which I thought was really interesting. The mayor spoke, the county, the city manager, but just talking about bringing an affordable, low carbon fuel into Petersburg was particularly impactful. And they were using, in that case, for police fleet, for mowing fleet, for bus fleet, They were for power generation. But interestingly enough, 4 years ago, all I could really talk about is making renewable propane the same way we made it from uh, renewable diesel or sustainable aviation fuel, hydro treating fats and oils uh, to create a zero carbon, many times a negative carbon fuel. Today, I'm showing you the second pathway, which is that's a particular uh, non-food cover crop called camelina, uh, drought tolerant, not a food crop, grows in rotation as a cover crop, grows across the grasslands of almost every continent on Earth, and so has great potential as an energy source. Brings the farmer into the equation. I really like that story. I'm proud to say that now we're really working on the third generation of renewable fuels, where the feedstock is captured CO2, uh, taking CO2, passing it over a catalyst, uh, often in one pass, oddly enough, to convert that CO2 to renewable propane. So it's a classic innovation story about using waste products efficiently and using very little water, if any water in many cases, converting them to energy that would have a carbon intensity of zero, where in many of these cases, depending on the feedstock, the carbon intensities might be minus 200 or more. I'm going to it all together because I think for us, the book really brought together a bunch of themes that we talk about. I always laugh. I spoke to DOE about a year ago now, and at the conclusion of my talk, a couple of people came up and said, "You talk more about affordability than we do at DOE," and I said, "Well, I'm quite aware of that because I think the key to adoption is affordability. I don't think consumers, I don't care whether consumers or individuals or corporations, are not going to choose low carbon options, zero carbon options, if they're not affordable and they at least don't make cost effective sense for them." So I key that up in my word cloud here, but it really is about reliability. It's about equity to a degree. Is it good for everybody? And I think that's what the book is all about. I think the last thing I'll do is just tease the book just for a moment. Uh, if you're interested in buying it, Gregory already told you how you can listen to the audio book. You can get it. You can get the book wherever you buy your books, and you can learn about it on the landing page at path2zerobook.com. All right, Gregory, I'm gonna take a break. I hope people want to ask each other questions, but that's really kind of, if you will, a 30-minute or so, view into the world of low carbon clean energy, maybe with a little bit tailored towards Virginia and to a degree the mission of clean cities.
And before we continue to the question and answer section of this webinar, I wanted to be clear that in the description of this video, there are links to Mr. Perkins' book, the links to Virginia Clean Cities, and my email, Gregory Brennan at Virginia Clean Cities. If you want to give us a call, our number's on there as well. Thank you so much for tuning in. Feel free to stick around for the question and answer. And with that, I'll pass it back to myself. Yeah, thank you so much, Tucker. That is phenomenal. And I apologize for leaving out Path to Zero, which is pivotal.
Yeah, no, you set me up. That was a good setup. Appreciate it.
Then you're welcome. Would you feel comfortable answering some questions, Tucker, if people have them for you? I know you said you want to take a break.
I would love it. I would feel wonderful and love it.
Well, feel free to unmute and ask your question if you have any. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can pop a question here in the chat, and we can read it off to Mr. Perkins here.
Yeah, I'm really not even. I'm super willing to have people who have a differing point of view. I love that sometimes.
I do have one question. I was curious. I know I've asked this before from some people in the Clean Cities group, but do you know of anything about a hybrid propane vehicle. Um, I have not heard of anything, but you being with Perk, I thought maybe you had.
Well, I can assure you that if you have ever gone to Las Vegas and taken a cab from the airport, I'd say there's a 95% chance you rode in a propane hybrid vehicle.
Oh, okay.
Um, in fact, Toyota, so there are probably something over 2,000 of them serving the Las Vegas community right now. Toyota actually makes a factory propane hybrid taxi for Japan. So yeah, they do exist. I'll just tell you, I mean, that's kind of my field of interest. We're working right now on quite a few propane hybrid uh, vehicles, generally class 5, 6, 7. Um, and 3 to 4 years ago, the technology just wasn't quite right on the hybrid powertrain. It just didn't make sense. But over the last 18 months, we've really perfected that technology. So you're going to see, in fact, at ACT, we're going to demonstrate, I think, at ACT, the ACT show that's on the West Coast, we'll be showing a few hybrid vehicles we expect. So yeah, they exist today, and I think they're going to exist much more numerous, particularly in class 6, 7, and 8.
Mm.
We're beginning to do, and I'll use the real world. I mean, we love the General Motors 6.6 liter engine. We're beginning to see that we can actually do great work with that General Motors engine or a Suzu engine, either one, and a hybrid powertrain. So we can move a beverage truck, for example, fully loaded with a 6.6 liter engine and a hybrid powertrain. And it's not only cost affordable for initial cost, its operating cost is crazy low. And compared to a electric vehicle or even a diesel vehicle, it's just a winner.
Yeah, I mean, something we've noticed. I'm working on a project with Drive Clean Rural USA, and one of the things we talked about is using propane vehicles in rural communities because there's lack of charging or other like forms of fuel. And so I've tried to find ways that like states or governments, like small towns, could buy propane vehicles, specifically hybrid ones, and we just weren't finding anything on the state procurement websites in Virginia. But that makes sense why. So nice to know they're
Yeah.
out there and that they're going to be coming to market hopefully soon.
Yeah, the Toyota. I mean, I can recommend you to people now who are doing the Toyota uh, hybrids
Okay,
commercially right
great. Um, John, I noticed you're off mute there. Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just was curious. Obviously being a marketer and dealing with a lot of propane powered school buses, that seems to be gaining a lot of traction with what we do. Tucker, I know you and several other marketers have been working with renewable propane, and hats off to you. I know those things take time to get going and get commercially viable. Do you have a rough guesstimate? I guess my question is, do you have a rough guesstimate of when do you think that would be a product that would be easily obtainable? I know right now it is attainable. I can get it, but I think the transportation cost from where it's currently being manufactured is a little bit of, you mentioned affordable, is a little bit of a inhibitor for fleets, say City of Newport News or Virginia Beach, being able to buy that versus conventional propane. So do you have a forecast of when you think renewable propane will be attainable at an affordable price?
Yeah, so John, thanks for that. Actually, it's funny. Let me just tell you a funny story. I got a call Friday, I guess, last week from Sacramento, California. Uh, they want to put a complete school bus fleet on renewable propane right under the nose of the governor there because they just had no other solutions. And it's the second time in California in the month of October, really, that California had said, if you'll use renewable propane, we'll waive our regulations, which is interesting. So we're running. I mean, probably today we sell 25 million gallons of renewable propane, and we're selling almost that exclusively in the school transportation in California, Washington, and Oregon. The nearest place we're making it today is Gesmer, Louisiana. So you're right, transport becomes a little bit outlandish. My guess is within 5 years, we're going to have a plant operating on the east. But still, the other, just not call a spade a spade. You know, the other issue that's working against us is Virginia doesn't have a low carbon fuel standard. And so all that renewable propane flows generally to states that already have a low carbon fuel standard. Because that actually gives generally the final user a rebate mechanism to get some of that money back. But I do think for schools, so, you know, environmentally sensitive fleets, I think a lot of this migration to a new style of renewable propane, we're going to see it get much closer to us in the East Coast rather than being a traditional petrochemical facility in the Louisiana complex, for example. So I think within 5 years, you'll see a lot of renewable propane flowing into transportation and power generation. I'm not remotely suggesting you'll use it in your home yet, but I think we will see it flow to on-road transportation and power gen.
Go ahead, Van.
Yeah, and I may have missed it in part of the presentation, Tucker. From an energy consumption standpoint, we know that the efficiency of an all-electric drivetrain is higher than using propane or any other fuel, right? We'll just say raw kilowatt hours to the wheel. I've done it on a short-term basis of using propane gen sets to make the electricity to fill up a school bus or others. Is there a viability in Virginia anywhere to do a little bit, say, larger scale propane to generate electricity on site? Because I don't have to run I can play around with when I run the propane generator. I don't have to run it 24/7. I can just size it up and run it, or fill up batteries and fill up the buses, where I can't get maybe the grid upgraded in time or cost wise. So I don't know if you've played around with it, you know, is it viable to
Oh,
do
no, no, in fact, I love that. In fact, we could talk about bidirectional power generation here for a whole nother 2 hours. And I don't really care whether we're talking about it residentially, commercially, or industrially. But let me back up. We're doing more EV power gen right now than I would have dreamed. Austin, Texas, that Waymo fleet exclusively powered by EV, propane powered gensets.
Yeah,
We're doing a similar program rolling into Massachusetts right now. And you're right that what we have for a decade, we worked on efficient engines. We were working on efficient engines because we were trying to make them cost less to operate. The beauty of that is we got more efficiency out of them. So yeah, now let me just say up to about 100 kW, we've got really good technology right now that didn't really exist 3 or 4 years ago. We finally perfected it. And so for EV charging, we're there. And I got my contact information up there, but it's pretty simple. Tucker.Perkins@propane.com. I'll be glad to connect you with people.
Are you working with like
I stopped
Pioneer Power?
adding, but I think we're probably at something like 30 or 40 megawatts of power gen between the oil patch, EV charging, and not residential backup, just more daily, or some of the work we're working on right now, they might run an hour and then, as you said, stop running. And the algorithms behind it are really good now, and so but the generators are there. By the way, if you want to go above 100 kW, we got 2 or 3 really good boxes, and we're in the most exciting project I've been around a long time with Caterpillar, which they're big. These are big engines, but for general charging, we just started a project this week charging in the Port of Long Beach, where they're going to electrify, but they don't have enough electricity, so it's the propane backup. And to John Phillips's earlier question, they're we tend to go into the toolbox and get renewable. So when they really want to be quantitative about their carbon emissions, it looks pretty good for them.
Yeah, because I mean, with 100 kW, I could run the generator 12 hours a day, and even on a really rough school bus route, I could do 6 to 8 buses every day off of a 100 kW genset. Just
Yeah.
running at 12 hours. So I mean, that's economically, that's not too bad of a ratio for somebody if they
Yeah, and
can't
I
get
would
paid.
I would tell you we're to the point now where we have multiple brands that we really appreciate representing, do well, charging anything from large institutional fleets down to just 3 or 4 vehicles a day.
Are you doing the stuff for Pioneer Power? Is that y'all's
Pioneer Power is one of those generators. Yeah.
okay. That's one of the two
Yeah.
you're working with, huh?
Yeah. The other one,
Okay.
I mean, again, I don't get paid by any of these people, but largely we've partnered with all of them and we know their technology well. There's a company in Canada we're really working with right now. We're really loving them, EC Power. But again, if you share with us, again, our goal is to just see that users get matched with the right technology. So once we kind of get into the power node, and we got a bunch of power specialists, so I'm happy to help you and point
Okay.
you. Pioneer is one, EC Power is one. There are a lot of people that are making good boxes. And by the way, we get to 200 kW, we got solutions. Just the air gets thinner up there.
But it's good to know 100 kW is kind of the sweet spot for efficiency and for renewable propane. That helps.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great question. Thanks. Well, I thought on the happy hour part, this is the part where it all kind of crack out a drink now. If y'all were here, I would have bought the first one. I apologize that we're not together.
Well, it is Wednesday. So I've got coffee here at, 3:30, which is not quite happy hour, but I'm happy that I'm drinking coffee. So anyone else have questions or conversation pieces you want to talk to Tucker about? I figured Alan would want to say something.
Oh, Alan's there. Good, Alan. Nice to see you. This is where I was going to at least put a plug. I'm on the board of 2 clean cities, but I probably go to, I don't know, 15 in a year's time. I don't think any organization is any better than our own Virginia group. I'm not saying it because Alan popped on. I'm saying it because I see it all. So if I can help anybody on this call, just reach out to me, tucker.perkins@propane.com, or, Alan Gregory know how to find me. And I just love what you do, and I encourage you to keep doing it. Democrats in power, Republicans in power. We need to move forward on clean air. So let's do it. We got an opportunity to do it. Let's do it.
Love that. Go ahead, Alan.
And I didn't have anything to really add, although I'm very honored to be in a world with all of you and Tucker to hear your good words, trying to juggle a lot. So I'm very grateful for the strength of the Virginia Clean Cities team, as well as board member and past board leadership here with John Phillips on the call. I can share that Virginia Clean Cities has a top-notch propane powered van that we are adding to our state fleet. So I'm also excited about the expanded use of renewable propane, which we also have on our state contract for that van. So you guys might have heard about that from others while I was delayed dealing with paperwork, but I'm just super grateful for all this, for this love. And I'm very excited about getting that van out to events in the year ahead.
Awesome.
Thank you again to Tucker Perkins and PERC for coming out to this webinar. Please check out the book. Check out his podcast. It is phenomenal. Thank you so much. This is Gregory Brennan with Virginia Clean Cities signing off.